Far from being secularist, the American constitutional order holds that our fundamental rights are not privileges conferred by any merely human power. They are rather gifts, endowments from God himself.
Yes, the United States is definitely a secular nation, and our rights are definitely conferred by human powers. They are granted and protected by human powers. God doesn't protect or confer anything. Today, we are going to be hearing from Robert George, who's going to be telling us how America is not a secular nation. Instead, it's a very religious nation that only prevents the establishment of a national church. If you want to fuck around and find out how wrong Robert George is about the United States of America's secular government, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Like I said, today, Robert George is going to be trying to convince us that the United States of America doesn't actually have a secular government. It's actually a very religious government that allows the legislation of religious laws. Well, let's see what evidence he has to convince us.
It has become a dogma of progressive ideology that America is a secular nation. What do people mean by secular?
Well, typically when people use the word secular, what they mean is that whatever topic they're talking about has no bearing on religion or doesn't take religion into consideration. So typically when we say that the government is secular, that means that the government can't legislate laws for or against any religion. The government protects the free exercise of religion or no religion at all. That is the extent of the concern that the United States government has with religion, which effectively makes it secular. He describes this as liberal dogma, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's no more dogmatic than saying gravity exists. The US government being secular is just a fact of reality. It's not really up for discussion because it's literally just the words of the Constitution.
The argument goes this way. Since the Constitution establishes a strict separation of church and state, religion has no place in how the country is to be governed. Religion is a purely private matter and therefore must be kept out of politics or public policy making. There is a problem with this claim, however. It's false.
I think that there's a little bit of nuance here that's being forgotten. Secularists aren't saying that people can't use their religious beliefs to form opinions on legislation. People are going to do that regardless. But those religious inclinations should not be the primary reason for legislating any law, because at that point, you're legislating your religion. Considering that the Bill of Rights grants the freedom of religion, the US government shouldn't be forcing people to follow religious laws. That is the wall of separation that Thomas Jefferson was talking about when he wrote to the Danbury Baptists. To maintain religious freedom, you can't legislate religious beliefs so that people are forced to follow those religious beliefs. If any politician puts God or religion at the forefront of their platform, they're not looking to represent you. They're looking to build a theocracy. They do not have your best interests in mind. They literally only care about the religion's best interest.
What the Constitution actually does when it comes to religion is first, ban religious tests of any sort for public office. That's in Article 6. And second, forbid the enactment of any law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Those are the words of the First Amendment.
Yes, they are, and those words are the wall of separation between the two entities. Recently, Justice Alito cited religious reasons for overturning Roe v. Wade, which essentially makes the decision a religious decision that's being forced in a country that supposedly provides religious freedom. White Christian nationalists are poised in just about every single state to pass legislation or have already passed legislation to force religious laws on their citizens. That isn't supposed to happen, but sadly, it is happening. On the flip side, the government also cannot enact any kind of law against a religion. For instance, we can't pass a law that forces Catholic priests to turn over Father McFeely for confessing that he diddled Billy in the rectory. I kind of hate this aspect of it, but if we want to maintain religious freedom and the wall of separation between church and state, this is something that we have to accept. Although I think you can make a good argument that if it somehow violates the health and well-being of people in the society, I really don't think that the First Amendment should apply, but hey, that's just me, I guess.
The plain meaning of those words is that Congress was forbidden from 1, establishing a national church on the model of the Church of England, and 2, attempting to disestablish or interfering with the established churches that existed in some of the states, in certain cases for decades after ratification of the First Amendment. But what about the separation of church and state? That's in the Constitution too, isn't it? Well, no. Try as you might, you will not find the words separation of church and state in the Constitution.
Well, while those words aren't directly in the Constitution, the sentiment is definitely there. Also, for someone looking for an exact phrase as an argument against the wall of separation between church and state, you started this entire section by saying something that is literally not in the First Amendment. Not just that, but the sentiment is not even there at all either. If the authors of the Bill of Rights only wanted to outlaw the establishment of a national church, that's what they would have said. The authors left it pretty open to any religious legislation by saying that the government should not enact any law respecting the establishment of religion. You literally have to insert words and intent into the Bill of Rights in order to get this idea that it only outlaws the establishment of a national church. Basically, it's a special pleading argument because for the first half of the sentence, it's only applying to the establishment of a national church. But for the second half of that part of the sentence, it definitely means the government can't fuck with religion. The wording never changes in a way that would indicate a radical shift like that.
The famous phrase comes from a letter that Thomas Jefferson, who was not at the Constitutional Convention, he was in France at the time, wrote years later to a Baptist community in Danbury, Connecticut. Jefferson, in his characteristically eloquent way, was simply trying to capture the spirit of the First Amendment prohibiting the establishment of a national religion. The author of the Declaration of Independence was committed to an America where people were free to practice any faith or no faith as their consciences dictate.
And also that nobody should be forced to follow any religion. By passing religious legislation, which would be any legislation that codifies any aspect of a religion, you take that protection away from people and force them to follow your religion. Now, I know some people might say, well, this isn't forcing them to become Christian or nothing. All religious legislation requires is that the primary reason for this legislation is a religious reason. For instance, if and sadly when Republicans ban abortion, they will be doing it in the face of the science that shows how beneficial these health services are to women. And the only reason why they're going to do it is because of their God. When these laws pass, or if they're already passed, they are religious laws. These Republicans are violating the First Amendment by forcing their citizens to follow their particular version of their religion. Honestly, it's fucking disgusting. Also, it doesn't matter if Thomas Jefferson helped write the Constitution or not. He had intimate knowledge of all of the author's intent. And if this wasn't really the intent of that particular line in the First Amendment, don't you think there would be some evidence of dissent against Thomas Jefferson? Don't you think that somebody would have wrote a follow-up letter to the Danbury Baptists saying that's not exactly what it says, nor was it our intent? And this response would have surely been recorded by the government. Citing a genetic fallacy against Thomas Jefferson is just downright ignorant.
None of the Founding Fathers, including Jefferson, who was among the least religious of them, though not an atheist, ever entertained the idea that there was to be a separation of religion from public life or from politics. The secularist claim that our Constitution consigns religion to the purely private sphere is contradicted by the words and actions of the greatest figures in American history, from Washington, who called for national days of prayer, to Lincoln, who proclaimed a national day of prayer and fasting, to Martin Luther King. King, of course, was the Reverend Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, a Baptist clergyman who fought racial segregation and discrimination in the most explicitly biblical terms.
Specifically, the First Amendment prevents the government from passing laws that enforce or restrict religious ideas. So it's not that the religion should remain private. You can be as public about your religion all that you want to. Government workers can even express their religion while at work. What they can't do is use government funds in order to benefit any particular religious institution. It literally doesn't matter what Washington, Lincoln, or MLK Jr. said or did. The fact is that in all of those instances, they weren't making religious laws. They were still respecting and using their freedom of religion. And don't even get me fucking started about how equality is definitely not biblical. I get that people can twist the Bible and support any position that they want to, but it's just plain as day in the Bible. Equality for women, other religions, and other races is strictly antithetical to the Bible, and the Constitution is antithetical to religious sensibilities.
If you believe the secularist understanding of the separation of church and state, Martin Luther King violated that doctrine in almost everything he did, and so did every president in American history. Every single one invoked God in his inaugural address. For Martin Luther King, as for so many other Americans, racial injustice was not only a violation of the Golden Rule, but first and foremost, a violation of the teaching of the book of Genesis that every human being is made in the image and likeness of God.
Oh, well, if that's true, why did Christians use the Bible to justify slavery for thousands of years? Also, why did Christians use the Bible to justify the wholesale slaughter of entire groups of people? If racial injustice is a violation of the Bible, then why is it that within the Bible, God commands certain racial injustices? These are all very hard questions to answer when you take a dipshit position like this guy has. Martin Luther King Jr. couldn't violate the separation of church and state because he was not passing any kind of law. While MLK Jr. had religious reasons for his activism, the things that he was advocating for did not only have religious reasons. Civil rights isn't a religious issue unless you're looking to stifle civil rights.
There are in the world truly secularist regimes. France, with its system of laïcité, religion must be exercised only in the private, not the public sphere, is one. So, of course, are the communist regimes of China, Cuba, and North Korea. In such regimes, secularism is the official public philosophy, and religion is, to the extent it is permitted at all, restricted to the private domain. But that is not an accurate description of the United States at all. And how could it be?
Well, France doesn't really belong in the same category as those other countries, and since 1992, Cuba has been a secular nation with a thriving religious community. From what I can tell, France has a similar system as we do in the United States. So claiming that religion is permitted at all, or restricted in some kind of way, is as much of a straw man for France as it is for the United States. Preventing the free exercise of religion isn't representative of the USA at all. But it is also correct to say that you can't pass religious legislation to force people to follow your religion. The problem with people like Robert here is that they interpret the First Amendment to provide a two-way mirror between church and state rather than a wall. They think that religious laws have no problem being forced on the United States citizens just as long as there's not a national church that is established. This is a real dipshit position, by the way.
Although we separate the institutions of religion from those of government, we do that not to make religion subservient to the state, but rather to protect it from the state. We are, after all, a nation which, in its very founding document, acknowledges the Creator, God Himself, as the source of justice owed to all human beings. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
You see, we separate the institutions of religion and government so that the government can't restrict religious ideas, but also so that religious ideas can't be forced on our population. That's why it's called a wall of separation. The government shouldn't be legislating for or against any particular religion, and that's what the First Amendment is for. Oh, God, I cannot understand how they can twist the Bill of Rights language like this. It's damn near criminal. Also, that quote about God that he used in this section is not actually in our constitutional documents. That is in the Declaration of Independence. While it is an important document in our history, it does not legislate any laws in our current government. So I don't know why he's bringing up the Declaration of Independence in this section, other than the fact that there is no explicit call to God in our actual constitutional documents. And I bet that he knows this, so he has to pull from irrelevant documents in order to make his case. This is disingenuous as fuck. Even if this language was in our founding documents, it's quite plain to see how these unalienable rights didn't apply to most people. The only people that are addressed in the original Bill of Rights in the Constitution were white property owners, and that strictly rules out people of color and women. I really don't think that he would want to make this particular argument because that requires him stripping the rights away from those groups of people.
Far from being secularist, the American constitutional order holds that our fundamental rights are not privileges conferred by any merely human power. They are rather gifts, endowments from God himself. And they are unalienable. That is, they cannot legitimately be taken away by government or any other human authority, precisely because they were not given to us by any human authority. Indeed, we couldn't give them away even if we wanted to. Why? Because they come from the hand of God.
Oh, wow, I have so many questions here. If these rights were indeed given to us by God, then why do they also need to be given and protected by people? And none of our constitutional documents actually say that God gives us these rights. The founders believed these rights to be unalienable because they decided that they were. Even if they thought that God gave them these unalienable rights, they still felt compelled to protect them in the Constitution for, the white property owners. And they did this because even if God did give us these rights, it's up to humans to protect those rights. And it's just fucking absurd to suggest that these rights can't be taken away. They are routinely changed and compromised. Currently, right-leaning states are poised to take away the right to privacy for women. And only women. States are going to legislate what women are allowed to do with their own bodies. The constitutional documents never give equal rights to people of color or women. We literally had to change our constitution in order to give those groups of people equal rights. So I really don't understand what in the fuck this guy's talking about.
So is the claim that America is a secular nation true? The answer should now be clear. I'm Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program at Princeton University for Prager University.
Yes. The United States of America is a secular nation as granted by the First Amendment. Radical Christian nationalists want to reinterpret the Constitution to be far more religious than it actually is. They do this by suggesting that the First Amendment only outlaws the establishment of a national church, which is not what the First Amendment says. The First Amendment clearly builds a wall of separation between church and state. The state cannot legislate for or against any particular religion. People like Robert George here likes to interpret that as being a two-way mirror that allows religious ideas to be enforced on the greater population of people in the United States. Instead of providing religious freedom, Robert George wants to force you to follow his religion. And that's not how anything was supposed to work in the government. Radical Christian nationalists want to gaslight you into thinking that America was never a secular nation. Don't let them do that. But I would love to hear what you heathens think down below in the comments. Do you agree with Robert George about our government? Or do you think that he's a dipshit just like I do? Let me know down below. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.